Hello everyone, Raven here. Today I want to go into something that is a personal favorite topic of mine, twists. However, before I get started, there's a couple things I need to talk about. I have been doing a channel on Twitch. I've mentioned it once or twice before. But as I've been on Twitch, there have been things that have come up that made me more and more hesitant to stick with that, and I think I might want to do more live streams here on YouTube. So I'm going to be doing that now. So, most of the time on there is going to be either writing or just discussing different stories, different books I'm working on, different poetry I'm doing, and you're doing as well. If I can get stream going, I want it to be more of just a time to discuss writing in general with you guys. So that's going to be starting now, where Sunday nights, uh, right now, the plan is 9:30 to 11:30 Pacific time. So might be pretty late for some of you, but it's mostly going to be just when I write some flash fiction. So I'm just going to be writing most of that. The other time will be on Wednesdays, 12:30 to 3:30 Pacific time as well. So that hopefully more people can join in. And that's where I really want to do more of the discussion. So, if you want to join in, really would love to have you. Depending on how things go, I might even do more. Might also be doing it on Mondays as well. But I'll still probably have a stream on Saturdays on Twitch. But for the most part, I'll do it here if things grow. So it depends on what happens. But that's what I'm looking to doing right now. So I'd love to have you join in. But for now, let's talk about twists. What I want to do is I'm going to do a three-part series on this. I've done it before, but I need to sort of start over. There's three main kinds of twists you can get into. What I'm going to start with today is pretty simple. There's not a whole lot I want to get into, and that is just general twists in your novel, your story, as it's in the middle of it. Maybe a shift from one act to the next. To give big example, Green Mile. It's right in the middle of the story. All of a sudden, you find out there's this supernatural component to it you didn't know about. Things like that. Although that also touches on what's going to be another subject, and that is a twist in what is the story. Not as the whole overarching story, but the genre. This is something that's done all the time by Dean Koontz in particular, where you're going to think for a while you're reading some kind of sci-fi book, maybe, and then all of a sudden you find out it was supernatural. Or maybe you think you're reading a fantasy, and then next thing you know, no, this was another sci-fi. So he just does this a lot, and there can be some really neat things done with that, but there's also risks. So that's what I want to go into when I go into that. Third topic is the usual twist at the end, where you flip everything on its head. That one, it's a little bit harder to do because it's happened so many times. People have gone so far with it. But I have to say, it can be amazing when done right. But there's also plenty of warnings. That'll be a third part. But as I said, today, we're just going to start off with just general twists in the middle of the story. Now, first off, I'm not just talking about surprises. Okay, you can easily have something come in that's unexpected, but not necessarily be a twist. You're not really changing anything, you're just adding something new to it. That is pretty simple. That's something you don't have to be as careful about. But what I will say, you gotta make sure if you do that, it's not gonna be too much of a distraction from what the story is. Usually, if you start to do that, it's gotta be a twist. Whatever your twist may be, when it comes in, it's gotta come unexpectedly, of course. It's also gotta come in a way where it doesn't sort of neutralize the story, it doesn't weaken the story. Instead, whatever drive was already there, whatever suspense or goal was already there, tension, whatever it may be, instead of weakening it, it strengthens it. It makes you even more eager to find out what happens. How is this going to be fixed? How is this going to be taken care of? If it's not going to do that, it's not worth having the twist. One of the main things that can happen, if you're going to do it this way, where it's right in the middle of the story, is a major change on the focus character. Who's at the center? Who is this story all about? Now, sometimes that can be where you go to the extreme and completely annihilate a character, and then because of that, the focus of it shifts over to somebody else. Now, what will work more often, not the only way it works, but more often, this works better if it's a character you already know in the story that you're going to shift your focus to. If you do this, you can do it where it's a friend of the main character, a friend of the person you've been focused on, and then it's pretty easy. Or you can go to an extreme and maybe make it who you thought was a villain, who you thought was an opponent. Now, 2 ways to make that work. One, just trying to show the other perspective, but not really changing your view of the character, which can be tricky because usually you can't just do it where you're going to focus everything on them from then to the end of the book. You've got to keep going around between them and somebody else. But if you do that, you could also go to taking it even further and making where you find out, no, this person is not the villain you thought they were. Maybe they change. Maybe something happens to change their perspective, their angle of how they see it, what the situation is, what they think their goal is, that kind of thing. That on one side can be easier in that it's simpler to explain, to make it where they can become more of a protagonist. However, the tricky part of that is it also makes it so you got to be very careful that you're not shifting them too much too fast. There's got to be an explanation for it. There's got to be a good reasoning behind it, a good way this fits in. It can't just be a sudden, now there's somebody else. You got to be careful with that. Or you could go to where you have a villain such as Hannibal Lecter. He is still an opponent. He's still an enemy. But that whole idea of enemy of your enemy is your friend. Where maybe he's going to be the one who kind of solves the problem, sort of gives the solution, but he's not necessarily going to be your real hero. That takes having the right character. If you've got the right character for it, that can be pretty simple. But not until you do. If you're changing to somebody else in the story, and you haven't developed them much, that's where one of the big challenges can come in. You've got to have some kind of hint or foreshadowing of this character coming in. One that did a bit of this is a Stephen King novel, The Outsider. Without saying too much, who you thought was your main character is not going to be at all. And instead, it's another character, but not one from this story, but another series of books he wrote. In that way, it's a character he's already set up, he's already built, he's already in a good place to use, but you've got this issue of, what about the people who haven't read the other books? They're coming at it with nothing to work with. One thing he does is it's not just focused on them. It's focused on them and some other people you've already known in the story. So it's a mix. That helps make that work. That helps carry it. And that's what you gotta be careful of. Are your readers ready for that? Are they going to be thrown too far off by this? Or are they going to be drawn in by it? In this book, the other thing that did it was that it was the story that pulled you along. There was such a mystery to it. Not just in, now we're not in this character anymore, but what happens makes it where you want to know even more what really occurred. And that's what your new characters are focused on, solving this puzzle. And so it makes it so you're on their side immediately, even if you don't know them that well yet. That's what makes that work, is the stories carrying this, not the characters. So it makes that so it's not going to throw you off as far. But there's also the flip side of the coin. Instead of a change of who your character is, it could be the other change of what the story is. No, this can't be an entire change of a story. If you're going to do that, if it's going to go to a completely different story, this should be done as a series. Series of novels, short stories, maybe a series of movies, TV series, whatever it may be. It shouldn't be one whole, because now you've got multiple stories. What it's got to be is it's got to be the kind of thing where the focus of it, the goal at the time, seems to change. But there's still this one overarching story, overarching goal that's holding the two sides of it together. This is where you kind of do the opposite. You have this character, or these characters that really are what draw you in and really connect you with this. The change in the story won't be as jarring because you're centered on them. They're your focus. They're what's pulling you along, and you want to know what happens to them. And really what that will do is it will also make it so that the twist isn't going to be as huge, surprising, jarring, etc. Simply because it's more of a side note. It's not going to be such a major twist because it's not on what your focus is. So if you want it to be more of that twist, that's where it's going to be tricky. How do you do that? This story has to be the kind of thing where it's more of stages. You're trying to do one thing. You think you're trying to do this. And then all of a sudden, you find out that was only the first step. There's a lot more to this than you thought. Now, I'm going to go outside of the stories, outside of fiction. This is something that can happen in real life. Immediately, I think of Romans 8:28. All things work together for good. That's something that can happen all the time. You may be wanting one thing to happen, you may be seeking one goal, praying for it, whatever. But then something happens. And maybe things don't go the way you planned, but you find out, wait, maybe that isn't the best goal. Because now that you're going this way, you realize there's even more I could do. There's even more that can come from this. And it sort of shifts your goal. It's still for the same story, still along the same plot line, along the same concepts. It's just now there's even more to reach for. That's the way to make this work, where you're changing your story's focus, but you're not really changing what the story's about. Those can be tricky. But boy, they can be a lot of fun when they work. So that's the thing you gotta remember is when you go and you do any kind of twist, any kind of plot change, character change, etc., you're always going to have the easier ways of doing it, but they're not going to have as big of an impact. But if you really want to make it hit hard, you're going to have even more difficult ones to figure out. It's going to be a lot trickier to get it right. So that's just the general idea with twists. Got to keep those things in mind. Like I said, next time I do something on this, it will be about changing the whole story. As in, not changing what it's about, but changing what you thought you were looking at. Finding out everything you'd assumed was incorrect. So go into that maybe next week, week after, depending on what happens. But remember, your twist, always keep your focus on keeping the characters in the story together, making sure they're going to keep working. Never make that twist your whole goal. Would love to see some of you on the live streams. Hope to get that going. Really would love to kind of shift over here to YouTube more. I just feel like this is the platform I feel more comfortable with. It's a little bit trickier to do streams here, but I've already done so much with videos. So hope some of you can join in. See you there. Hope your writing goes well, and God bless.